Any questions?
Yeah, Senator Dodd, I love the way you answered. Okay, how do we translate it into action?
Well, we're doing what you're doing. Obviously, I think the ideas of mobilizing, you've got a remarkable number of people. One of the things that hasn't been talked about, at least while I've been here, is that sitting here in America particularly, it's not just their volunteers, but what they've been able to produce as volunteers. There's a multiplier effect here that doesn't often get discussed. We talk about the number of people who actually volunteers, but what they're able to achieve in their communities. And it's good old one-on-one politics. You know, my colleagues, some of whom are familiar with this and would be for it anyway, others need to be reminded that there are people back home who care about it. There's nothing like that as the best lobbying in the world gets done on a local level. And so by people in our communities who recognize the value of this, expressing their support for these concepts and ideas, if not the very bills themselves, can really make a difference. And this is the time to do it. It's not going to get done in the next 4 weeks. It's not going to be a part of a continuing resolution. I'm not going to get my bills passed in the next few weeks. But we're going to have a new administration on January 20th, either McCain or Obama. In either case, I think there's going to be a greater receptivity to this idea. Let me say, as a Democrat, the last Republican administration that cared as much about this, I was sort of disappointed he wasn't reflected here. It was Ronald Reagan, of all people. Now, he was tough on some of the domestic issues, but every year for 8 years, he increased the funding for the Peace Corps in those days. That was the only agency, I think, that got increased funding in those days, but he did. And in a sense, and I think McCain gets this in a way. And I'm obviously an Obama supporter, and I'm hoping he wins. But I think there's a real chance with McCain as well to tee this up and get it ready, define it in terms that can be a part of a national agenda. So that's the job between now and January.
Isn't it possible, everybody focuses and says this is a cost issue, but isn't it possible?
Cost not to do it.
Well, I actually think there's a value return. Isn't it possible that we can identify those individuals that you talk about, over 55, who are extremely intelligent in energy, in finance, and send them out as an army and do financial literacy training, energy conservation, and put a direct correlation to economic value on that?
Of course you can, and that's easier to do. I mean, one of the cases we made is the GI Bill, not a service program, but that program was not inexpensive in the end of the 1940s. It's paid back eightfold the cost of that program in terms of the taxes paid by people whose education improved. In this case, we can directly identify cost savings as a result of what happens through like City Year and AmeriCorps at the domestic level at home. There's a direct correlation between reducing costs, assisting people getting on their feet, and creating economic opportunity. So we're going to make that case. So while there is a cost, we need to, in this case, remind people very quickly about the savings associated with this.
How many slots would you like to see open?
I'm sorry?
How many more Peace Corps opportunities would you like to see?
Well, look, I mean, now there's 5,000. When I was in, there was 17,000. I'll tell you a great story. Harris Wofford told me this story. I don't think he told it until I walked out of the room for a minute. When John Kennedy sent off that first group of volunteers in the South Lawn of the White House in 1961, he walked back into the Oval Office, and Harris Wofford was in the room, along with Sarge Schreiber and a few others. And President Kennedy turned to the small gathering. He said, "This is the best idea." He said, "You know, in the next 45 to 50 years, we'll have 1 million people who will have served overseas, bringing back the knowledge, the talent, the language skills, the ability to understand the world in which they live." There have only been 180,000 of us in 48 years that have come back, so far short of Kennedy's words that day that 1 million would be coming back to the country. And we only have 2 Peace Corps programs in the Arab world, one in Jordan, one in Morocco. I mean, we ought to be engaging these communities, not frightened of it, but engaging. As I said, you can't hate us if you know us, and there's no greater ambassador anywhere than some person out there trying to dig a well, build a school, improve a road, that people get to know. And so my hope is that with an Obama presidency, I'm confident we can do it. I chair the committee dealing with the Peace Corps, and I fight every year to get additional funding. My nephew is now working on training aides teachers in Guyana. Was in Africa for a year and a half as a Peace Corps volunteer. It's a remarkable, great experience. Obviously today we're focusing on domestic issues, but service, it's service. And you'll find that Peace Corps volunteers, when they come back, engage in the domestic service of their country, case after case.
I want to thank you for making this part of the national conversation, and I'm just wondering, moving forward, what are your ideas for keeping it there?
Well, I'm never going to stop talking about it. As I said, I made it a centerpiece of my campaign. Obviously, not because I made it the centerpiece of the campaign. The campaign didn't do terribly well. I think the issue is alive and well. And so we'll just keep at it. I'm the second ranking member next to Senator Kennedy on the Education, Health, and Labor Committee, where these programs all are authorized. I'm on the Foreign Relations Committee where I have jurisdiction over the Peace Corps, so I'm in a good position to have a lot to say about this and how it works. And I look forward to that. So in the United States Senate, you can do a lot, and my intention is to use that office for many reasons, not the least of which is this.
What's different about attitudes about volunteerism now compared to when you were in the Peace Corps in this country?
Well, I think people today recognize, as this radical idea of the Peace Corps, it's probably been the most singular, popular federal agency continuously over 50 years. I mean, people talk about eliminating a lot of things. You never hear people say, well, eliminate the Peace Corps. They don't talk about eliminating Vista or AmeriCorps. They may have fought it to establish it, but once it's in place, they don't talk about getting rid of it. And so I think people have seen, the constituencies in the country have seen the value. And in the days when I first started, service was really completely a local thing in many ways. I mean, you go by the Conservation Corps in the Great Depression, but those programs ended once the country sort of got back at the end of World War II. And so that period between the 1940s and the 1960s, there was the community chest, there was the local drives at your local level. It didn't become a national issue really once again on a continuing basis until the 1960s, and that has had its peaks and valleys. But I sense again today what I said there. I think there's the level of excitement about serving is as high as I've ever seen it in the last 45 years. I wish I could speak better to describe the feeling of what it was like to be invited by an American president to serve your country. And as I said, a lot of us did a lot of different things, but you had the feeling you were part of something, you were making a difference. And I think this generation is as hungry for that sense as any generation I've seen in the last 50 years. And so it's there. The question is now, can we fulfill that hunger? And that's really, the architecture has got to be there.
Senator, it was a terrific bipartisan show last night, but did you sense there's a distinction between the McCain view of volunteerism and the government's role and participation in it and the Obama view last night?
Oh, clearly, no question. I say this respectfully. And having served in the military, and after the Peace Corps, in fact, trained here at Fort Dix, New Jersey, back in those days, there is a difference in a sense. That question of why did you do this was because an American president asked me to, and not only asked me, but he created the opportunity for me to do it. And it's one thing to endorse an idea and say it's a wonderful thing if people serve. It's yet another step to say, not only am I going to encourage it and ask you, I'm going to create the opportunity for you to do it. And that's what's missing in the McCain language. He admires people who do it, he applauds them for doing it, but sort of find your own way. Military, fine, I want you to serve there, but I don't think it's my job to create architecture for people to serve to make a difference. And that's a fundamental difference, I think, in approach. And again, I'm hopeful that John McCain will come around to recognizing that you have to have the architecture to make this work. It isn't enough to applaud people who do it and hope they do it. You've got to create those opportunities. And having a national leadership that is willing to do that. And then invite nonprofits and private sector to be a part of the architecture. But you need to create it as a national leader.
When would you like to see the bill passed, Senator?
Yesterday.
Would you ever support mandatory service?